Emma, your grandmother passed away about a year before you were born, and so you didn't get a chance to really meet her, but you probably know your grandmother better than a lot of people might know their grandmothers, because you have the ability to look up stories on her and the many stories that were told about her, and to see her films. When was the first time you realized that grandma was somebody pretty important?
Oh man, well, it's a great question. It's one that I've actually been asking myself a lot recently because I'm writing a book about my grandmother with my father. And you know, I've been remembering recently, ever since I was tiny, 5 years old, I saw her face on handbags and in store windows, and this face just keep popping up, and my father would say, you know, that's your grandmother. And slowly it started to sink in, like, wow, a lot of people must know who this woman is.
Yeah, because everybody's grandmother's not on handbags.
No, not at all, not at all. And it felt very kind of actually impersonal for me at the beginning, until I think I started to learn more about her work with UNICEF and more about her life outside of the entertainment industry, actually. And then I started asking more questions, you know, in my family and to my father, and I've slowly kind of built this relationship with her. It's like a relationship, non-relationship, I like to think of it. But
you mentioned UNICEF, and what's so interesting about that is that that's not by accident, that relationship. She was around after, you know, post-World War II, when Europe was a mess, her home was a mess. Explain to folks what it was she was going through as a little girl that really connected her to have empathy and sympathy for so many charitable projects.
Yeah, it's such an amazing point, and I think it's such a beautiful story. You know, she was living in Holland during the war and had to flee to live in the UK. But before she fled, she was basically living in hiding, and she was actually, not many people know this, she was a like a messenger for the resistance, and she would carry these secret messages and go and perform ballet for, you know, the resistance soldiers. And she was eating bread made from tulips and basically starving. So she, you know, when she went later into the field, she had this immense compassion for starving children and women around the world that I think would have been unparalleled, if not.
Yeah, and that's one thing that UNICEF does, is serves the children from around the world. Sometimes people say, well, we have kids here who need help, but there are no borders when it comes to suffering. There are no borders when it comes to children's well-being.
Indeed, indeed. And you know, I think that she came at a time where actually people on this side of the world, it wasn't as common knowledge as it is now about what was going on in Africa, what was going on in the Middle East. And we have, you know, we have the news now, and we have this daily influx of these refugee crises and, you know, famine crises. But she was really the pioneer to bring that knowledge into the Western world, and she paved the way for people like Angelina Jolie or Princess Diana to come later on and to continue essentially being these Pied Pipers for the children.
Yeah, and paved the way for you. Philanthropy is a part of your heart as well,
slowly,
right?
Sure, yes. You know, I still consider myself very young, but it's something that I try and tie into whatever it is that I'm doing, and I keep it close to my heart at all times.
And speaking of tying into, obviously we spoke about the children around the world that need help, but in Houston, you know, UNICEF also answers a particular crisis. I know last year it was dealing with the child sex trafficking issue. This year we had a lot of kids who were lost because of Harvey.
I mean, it's amazing. Like this is my first time in Houston, actually, but already the spirit of the people that I feel here and this sense of community and of giving back is really particular. And I think that it's not common, you know, I've traveled around the world a lot. It's not common for there to be such a spirit within the community like that. That's sort of so shared. It's amazing.
When you're Audrey Hepburn, you have a voice. When you're a celebrity, you have a voice, right? And so sometimes I think people feel like, what can I do? But it can be just the smallest of things.
No, and you know, I think that actually everyone has a voice. And what I've noticed in my work so far, and it's really only been about 2 years now that I've been more closely involved with certain humanitarian issues that I feel strongly about, but just talking about it, I mean, you know, I have people who do look up to me because of who my grandmother was and because of this legacy, but I notice that when I talk about it, other people talk about it, and when people are just simply talking about it, there's a level of awareness that is raised, and I think people take it for granted, but it's not to be overlooked at all.
All right, the first movie that you saw your grandmother in?
Oh man, I think it was Funny Face, actually, and it's my favorite to date.
Yeah, and why?
Why? I mean, the colors, the clothing, it's just it's all the air of an era that, in my opinion, is now lost, unfortunately. It's just so romantic and so over the top in the best possible way.
Every generation is impacted by the generation before. What lessons do you think you've learned from your father that he may have learned from Audrey?
I'm so immensely grateful to have been born into the family that I was born into, and it's not because I have a famous grandmother, but it's because from as long as I can remember, we've been doing these family efforts and becoming involved in charities, and my father, not even directly, but just by this action that was taught to me, I learned from very early on that nothing that I have is anything at all if it's not shared.
Yeah. If you live in New York.
I live in Brooklyn, but yes, I live in New York.
Yeah. Do you ever walk down those streets and think these are the streets that my grandma walked down?
Only when I had a photo shoot on Fifth Avenue, literally like in front of the Tiffany store, and I was walking down Fifth Avenue and thinking like, wow, this is really kind of full circle.
Yeah, because that whole kind of artistic thread runs through your veins as well. So some of the other things that you do, you model. Yes, I model. I mean, I don't consider myself a model. I model for certain things, you know, friends or different projects and stuff like that. But I am an artist first and foremost. I graduated from the Florence Academy of Art. I have a degree in fine painting and fine art, and I'm a writer as well. Yeah, so I consider myself an artist. Yeah, those two things, you know, being a writer and creative writing, I imagine, right?
Yes, but also nonfiction.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then art. They're the two things that we find kind of struggle in schools today because the focus is put on the sciences to be competitive.
Yeah.
But what is it that you think the arts do for us? You can't eat it, drink it, sleep it, whatever, but what does it do for us?
For me personally, I really find more and more that there are certain things that I can express through a visual vocabulary or through a poetic vocabulary that otherwise expressed through normal language or normal communication don't carry the same feeling or don't carry the same sort of wavelength for me. And that's, I think that it is about the expression of the sort of otherwise unexpressible.
Yeah. Emma, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.